destroying factories. Like after Assad, 95% of Palestinian factories were either destroyed or partially destroyed or inoperational, not allowing in, you know, a ban on the import of parts for factories, cement, you know, water filters, all this kind of thing. So the point isn't, let's just kill as many people as we can, right? That would be easy. No, it's actually much more sinister. Let's destroy the productive sector and their ability to thrive and prosper and become self-sufficient.
When I was in Gaza, I knew Dr. Abdelaziz Rantisi, who headed the political wing of Hamas. And as a 10 or 11-year-old boy in 1956, he was in Khan Yunis when the Israelis did their 100-day occupation of Gaza, and in order to break the back of resistance, what were known as the Fedayeen, rounded up boys and men of military age, lined them up against walls and killed them. Joe Sacco has documented this in his magnificent book, Footnotes in Gaza. And that experience of watching his uncles, cousins, neighbors being shot in cold blood radicalized Rantisi. And I think that's what we're seeing throughout Gaza. It's not seen from the outside, but this horrific and ongoing violence, you know, 500 and some Palestinian children were murdered indiscriminately last summer, coupled with the humiliation, the collective humiliation. We mentioned the struggle to get food, and many people are dependent on handouts. I think up to 80% are dependent on some handouts. The fact that you don't have adequate medical supplies, and when people have medical emergencies, they're often, they can't get out of Gaza to get to a hospital in Israel, and they will die at the border crossing. I was at an ambush at Netzarim with a 19-year-old kid who was killed, and when I went to visit his family, they told me that when the news came that his brother had been shot dead by the Israelis, he went missing, and they found him walking down the road with a kitchen knife going back to Netzarim to attack Israelis. And oftentimes violence that is carried out by the acts of resistance by Palestinians, whether it's from suicide bombings to rockets, you know, fired into Israel, I think the causal factors of that are overlooked, that it's the massive industrial and sustained use of Israeli force that has brutalized a people to such an extent that violence is a very natural reaction, one that all of us would have. And I think we also have to add that when you are a young man in Gaza, you have no work, you have no money, you have no capacity because you don't have any resources to get married, you're sleeping 10 to the floor of a concrete hovel in a refugee camp. The only way that you can affirm yourself is to become a shaheed, to become a martyr. And I'd like to talk about this, the psychological consequences of the horrific daily repression, the humiliation, and the struggle, and what it's doing to people.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier that something like 75% of Gaza's population is under the age of 25. And in addition to the ban on so many things that we mentioned before, like, you know, certain types of foods and cement and whatever, what the, you know, youth of Gaza always emphasize to me is like, look, first and foremost, this is a siege on our freedoms. That needs to be, you know, people need to remember that. A siege on the ability of farmers to farm, on fishermen to fish, and a categorical ban on students to study outside of Gaza. So there's actually a categorical ban on a certain category, you know, ages of I think up to 35 or 40. Palestinian youth are forbidden from traveling outside of Gaza to study, be it in Birzeit or Jerusalem or wherever. And that's really important to remember too. What happens, you know, after you, if you are able to have the means to graduate in Gaza, then what, you know, they just published a figure saying that now Gaza has the highest unemployment rates in the world. And you do see this spirit in youth, you know, despite everything. Yes, of course, the natural reaction of anyone, right? If I was to poke you 10 times on the face, eventually you're going to swat me. But then again,
and imagine if you shoot my mother and father.
And imagine if I shoot your mother and father, and I, you know, and we should remind people that there's 10,000 severely injured people
Right.
in Gaza, including many amputees now
Who
as
can't
a
receive
result.
prosthetics. And
Who can't receive prosthetics, what kind of life, and
Right.
and yes, there's help and there's supportive organizations and so on. But then, yeah, what future? I mean, we have to remind people that, and you mentioned this, but Gaza is surrounded by a completely impervious border, sea, controlled by land, air. There's no way out
Which we
to
should
seek
make
refuge.
clear that the military government of Sisi in Egypt,
Yeah.
in alliance with Israel,
Absolutely, yeah.
because they are sworn enemies of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
They have
And so
to.
there's no, I mean, we hear stories of like migrant and refugees from Syria and here and there, risking the Mediterranean and going, and that's not even an option for Gaza. As dangerous as that journey is, that's not even an option.
Right.
So again, as a youth, what do you do with that? And again, it's that severe psychological repression. I mean, somebody the other day said to me, a close friends of theirs in Gaza that they mentor, said to her, he doesn't know what to do anymore. He's lost all hope. He feels like,
Well, when you brutalize people, they become brutal. I mean, you
Abs-
bomb
and
Cambodia.
that's the goal,
you
isn't
bomb
it?
Cambodia, and it is the goal. You bomb Cambodia, you end up with Pol Pot.
Yes.
You bomb Iraq for 12 years, you end up with ISIS. And if you read accounts of the Sobibor uprising in the death camp, when the Jews rose up and managed to get crude knives and burst into the offices of either German administrators or Nazi camp guards, I remember reading one account where a Jewish inmate starts stabbing one of the Germans who is administrating, going, "This is for my mother. This is for my father. This is for my sister." And the Palestinians are reacting the way we would react if we lived in that
And to be
situation.
honest, they're reacting very, their reaction is very subdued, I should say. We would probably react much more violently, I would think. I mean, if someone was to dispossess you of your land and, completely divide you from one another as a people, fragment you, colonize you, besiege you, and then on top of that, bomb you continuously, as you were saying, in a sustained manner.
And deny your children medicine.
And deny your children medicine and education and freedom, prevent you from farming and so on. How would you react? And not over the course of 1 year, but over the course of 60-some years.
Right.
So I think their reaction has been very subdued and mild, as a matter of fact. And, they constantly inspire, I always say, especially the youth, and how they have reacted. I especially like to focus and narrate the stories of especially the women, but also the youth, and how they really struggle to survive with dignity and retain that humanity despite every attempt to deprive them of it, because that's ultimately the goal. How you keep the family unit together and sane, right?
I would say that it's Islam.
Yeah.
When I went into the refugee camps, it was that structure of 5 prayers a day.
Yeah.
The stricture against alcohol, tobacco, because these are substances that you begin to retreat into when you are in despair.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely,
part of my
that's true.
anger at Charlie Hebdo was that they were taunting the wretched of the earth about the one thing that gave them dignity and held them together as human beings and gave them a sense of purpose.
Sense of hope and purpose.
Hope
absolutely.
and purpose and dignity and courage and integrity. And I think that, I don't know if you agree, but I think that the reason that the Palestinians have been able to react in such a humane fashion, with such dignity, and have been able to retain the ability to resist, and we should make clear that most resistance has been nonviolent, has been the fact of their faith.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. How can you endure in such a situation without faith? In the absence of that, there's nothing left. If you look at the situation around you and the forces that are supporting it, you would lose hope and all faith.
Well, I spent 7 years in the Middle East, and I walked away with a very deep and abiding respect for Islam.
Let's hope that beauty and that spirit endures, and not the worst elements that are sort of like you were saying in the aftermath of bombings and colonizations and wars, and then you kind of leave and.
But fundamentalism is its own animal. Fundamentalism in every religion looks the same, whether it's Christian fundamentalism,
and it's just
Jewish
a matter of reminding that,
fundamentalism,
right?
or Islamic fundamentalism.
Absolutely.
And fundamentalists in 1/5 of the world's population is Muslim, and fundamentalists like ISIS or Al Qaeda constitute not even 1%.
That's what, yeah, my husband constantly reminds people. It just happens to be this arc of history that we're in right now. And yeah, it's very ugly, unfortunately. But like you were saying, you have to look beyond the headlines or beneath the headlines. And
well, don't read the headlines.
Or don't read them at all. I don't, like I was saying, I don't have TV or I don't read the headlines.
I think the frustration for those of us who come out of the Middle East and come out of Gaza is that what happens is that these people are, treated, little better than animals by the Israeli government, little better than livestock led to slaughter, with, of course, complete American complicity. I remember F-16s bombing Gaza and going to bomb sites and picking up pieces of shrapnel that say made in Dayton, Ohio.
And then you see a sign said, funded by, this reconstruction is funded by the American people right next to it.
Right, there you go.
Yeah.
People see the explosion. People see the rage.
Absolutely,
but they don't see the long, steady, slow drip of humiliation, collective punishment, violence, frustration, and so what happens is that because all of that is ignored by the outside world and by the media, it's only when something explodes, and then because there's no understanding of what led to that rage.
Absolutely, the context.
They're certified as kind of insane.
Well, they're crazy. I mean, look how they, react. Though they're so violent, and everything becomes sort of, conflated. Well, it's the religion is so violent, or whatever, and and this is something too that the Israelis use in their attacks against Palestine. Well, it's
it's called racism.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Laila.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
And thank you for joining Days of Revolt.
Had to eat out the watermelon patch. And they put me in a shack